In the dust-swept frontier town of Silver Creek, where legends fade like the setting sun, a deadly miscalculation is about to unfold. The notorious Hawkins Gang believes they've found an easy mark, a quiet widow running a modest store on the edge of town. They couldn't be more wrong. Sarah McCall isn't just another shopkeeper trying to make ends meet. For 20 years, she was the most feared lawwoman in the Western Territories, a shadow rider whose very name made outlaws tremble. Her identity, carefully hidden beneath graying hair and a shopkeeper's apron, was known only by her call sign, the Ghost, a relentless hunter who brought justice to the lawless lands, then vanished into whispered legend. This is not just another tale of frontier justice. This is the story of how the West's most ruthless gang learned that some legends never truly die. When they backed her into a corner, they didn't realize they were walking into an elaborate trap laid by the territory's greatest strategist. What follows is the account of how one woman, armed with nothing but a lifetime of cunning, a town full of unexpected allies, and the tactical brilliance that made her a legend, would dismantle the most dangerous gang west of the Mississippi. Before the dust settles, the Hawkins Gang will learn why even retired legends should never be underestimated. Greater than. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Silver Creek's main street as Sarah McCall swept the wooden boards in front of her general store. Her gray hair was neatly pinned back, her work dress plain and practical, every bit the image of a widow making her quiet way through life. To passing strangers, she was unremarkable, just another shopkeeper in a frontier town trying to survive. From the corner of her eye, she watched 3 men lounging outside the saloon across the street. They'd arrived 2 days ago, trailing dust and trouble behind them like a storm cloud. Their eyes followed her movements with predatory interest, not bothering to hide their attention. She recognized their type immediately, scouts for something bigger, testing the waters before their gang moved in. "Evening, Mrs. McCall," Deputy Tom Parker called out as he passed on his evening rounds. Young, earnest, and green as spring grass, he tipped his hat with genuine respect. "Any trouble today?" "Quiet as can be, Deputy," Sarah replied, her voice gentle and motherly. She'd cultivated that voice carefully over the years, along with the slight stoop in her shoulders that made her appear older than her 50 years. Though those gentlemen across the way seem mighty interested in our little town. Tom's hand instinctively moved closer to his gun, but Sarah laid a calming hand on his arm. Now, Deputy, no need for that. I'm sure they're just passing through." Her touch was soft, but 20 years ago that same hand could fan a colt faster than any man in the territory. As Tom moved on, Sarah returned to her sweeping, her movements deliberate and unhurried. Inside, her mind was racing, calculating. She'd heard the whispers. The Hawkins Gang was moving north, leaving a trail of broken towns and empty bank vaults in their wake. These scouts matched the descriptions perfectly. Inside her store, beneath the normal trappings of commerce, the barrels of flour, the shelves of canned goods, the rolls of fabric, lay preparations years in the making. Every window had reinforced shutters that appeared decorative but could stop bullets. The heavy oak counter concealed a small arsenal. The root cellar connected to tunnels that ran beneath the town, escape routes and storage spaces known only to her. As she worked, she heard fragments of conversation drift across the street. "Easy pickings. Just a widow woman. Hawkins'll want to know." Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Let them think her weak. Let them see what they expected to see. A gray-haired widow running a modest store, no threat to anyone. They didn't know they were walking into a trap 20 years in the making. They couldn't know that. Before she was Sarah McCall, shopkeeper, she was the Ghost, the most feared name in the Western Territories. In the distance, thunder rolled across the plains. Or perhaps it was hoofbeats, bringing the rest of the Hawkins gang to their doom. Sarah finished her sweeping, gathered her skirts, and went inside to prepare. The storm was coming, and she was ready to remind the world why outlaws once spoke her name in whispers. The bell above her shop door tinkled softly as she closed it, a sound as delicate and harmless as she appeared to be. But in the gathering darkness, her eyes were sharp and cold as steel, watching, waiting, ready for the battle to come. Greater than, dawn painted Silver Creek in shades of gold as Sarah McCall began her daily routine. She moved through her store with practiced efficiency, checking inventory, arranging displays, and preparing for the day's business. To anyone watching, it was the unremarkable routine of a shopkeeper. To Sarah, it was a dance of deception she'd perfected over 15 years. As she counted coffee beans into small paper bags, her mind drifted to another morning, decades ago. She'd been young then, training under Marshal James Cooper, the man who would become her mentor. "Your greatest weapon," he'd told her, "isn't your gun or your badge. It's making them think you're harmless until it's too late." The bell above the door chimed, bringing her back to the present. Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife, entered with her usual list of supplies. "Terrible business," she whispered, leaning close over the counter. "They say the Hawkins gang hit Preston's Crossing yesterday, cleaned out the bank, shot the sheriff." Sarah clucked sympathetically while her mind cataloged the information. Preston's Crossing was 3 days' ride south. The gang was moving faster than expected. "Lord have mercy," she murmured, measuring flour with steady hands. "Perhaps we should pray they pass us by." Through her window, she spotted 2 more rough-looking men joining the scouts at the saloon. Their horses bore the distinctive cross brand she remembered from wanted posters, more pieces falling into place. As she served customers throughout the morning, Sarah maintained her carefully crafted image. She kept her shoulders slightly stooped, her movements deliberately slower than they could be. When she reached for items on high shelves, she made a show of using her stepping stool, though she could easily grab them without it. Every gesture reinforced the impression of a woman slightly past her prime, no threat to anyone. But beneath the counter, her fingers would occasionally brush against the hidden lever that would drop her favorite Colt into her hand. Behind the innocent-looking display of preserved fruits, a small mirror let her watch the street without being obvious. The flour barrel by the door contained more lead than grain, positioned perfectly to provide cover if needed. During a quiet moment, she slipped into her back storeroom, officially to check inventory. In reality, she needed to wind the complex system of clockwork timers she'd installed years ago. Tonight, they would ring small bells at random intervals, making it seem like she was moving around the store when she was elsewhere. A simple trick, but one that had saved her life more than once. Sarah paused at her desk, opening a leather-bound ledger. To casual observers, it contained only business records. But between the lines of merchandise orders and sales figures was a different kind of accounting. Descriptions of suspicious customers, movement patterns of known outlaws, notes about unusual activities in the territory. She added her observations about the new arrivals, her handwriting deliberate and neat. The afternoon brought young Deputy Parker again, this time to purchase ammunition for his revolver. Sarah noted how his gun belt rode too low, a dangerous tell in a firefight. As she wrapped his purchase, she casually offered advice disguised as an old woman's concern. "My late husband always said a man's belt should ride high and tight," she commented, patting her own hip arthritically. "Safer that way when you're working around the farm." Tom adjusted his gun belt without realizing he'd been taught a vital lesson in gunfighting. Sarah smiled inwardly, remembering how Marshal Cooper had taught her the same principle, though far less subtly. As the sun began to set, Sarah started her closing routine. She locked the front door, checked the window shutters, and lit the lamps. All normal activities for a shopkeeper, but each action had a dual purpose, each movement part of her preparation for what was coming. The Hawkins Gang was coming, yes, but they were also walking into a trap set by a hunter who had never truly retired, only changed her hunting grounds. Greater than. The Hawkins Gang made their reputation in blood, 3 banks robbed in the past month, 2 sheriffs dead, and a string of broken towns left in their wake. Now their advance party swaggered down Silver Creek's main street as if they already owned it, 5 hard men with cold eyes and heavy guns. Sarah watched through her shop window as they approached, maintaining her placid expression, even as she noted their weapons, their positioning, the way they moved as a coordinated unit. These weren't common bandits. They were experienced killers who worked together with military precision. The bell above her door chimed with deliberate menace as they entered. Their leader, a tall man with a scarred face who introduced himself as Jake Morton, smiled without warmth. "Afternoon, ma'am. Fine establishment you have here." "Why, thank you, sir," Sarah replied, letting a slight tremor enter her voice. "How may I help you gentlemen today?" Morton leaned against her counter, his coat falling open to reveal his gun. "Just admiring your store, Mrs. McCall," she supplied, wringing her hands in apparent nervousness. "Sarah McCall." "Widow McCall," one of his men added with a smirk. They'd done their research, at least the surface-level kind. "Yes," Sarah confirmed, ducking her head. "These past 5 years." Morton's eyes roamed the store, taking in the well-stocked shelves, the prime location, the sturdy construction. Must be hard running a place like this all alone. Dangerous times for a defenseless woman. "The good Lord provides," Sarah murmured, while mentally marking each man's position in her store. The one by the tobacco had a shotgun under his coat. The tall one near the flour barrels favored his right side, a telltale sign of a shoulder holster. "Indeed he does," Morton agreed with mock piety, "but sometimes he provides through earthly messengers. My associates and I, we offer protection to establishments like yours, for a reasonable fee, of course." Sarah clutched her shawl closer, appearing to shrink into herself. I don't have much money, sir." "Now, don't you worry about that just yet," Morton soothed, his voice dripping false concern. "We'll work something out. Just remember, times being what they are, terrible accidents can happen to unprotected businesses." As if to emphasize his point, one of his men deliberately knocked over a display of canned goods. The crash made Sarah jump, a calculated reaction that satisfied their expectations of a frightened widow. "Think about our offer," Morton suggested as they turned to leave. "We'll be back tomorrow for your answer." The bell chimed again as they exited, laughing among themselves. Sarah maintained her trembling facade until they were well down the street. Then, moving with swift efficiency, she locked the door and pulled down the shades. In the privacy of her store, she allowed herself a grim smile. The Hawkins Gang was indeed more sophisticated than common bandits, but they'd shown their hand too early. Their protection scheme was meant to establish control of the town before the main gang arrived, targeting the seemingly weakest businesses first. Sarah moved to her hidden ledger, documenting their visit with precise detail. Morton's gang clearly answered to someone higher. Their discipline suggested military background, but their tactics were too refined for common deserters. This was the advance team for something bigger. She had 24 hours before they returned, time enough to begin her countermoves. Reaching beneath the counter, she extracted a small mirror and placed it carefully in her window, angled just so. To most it would appear decorative, but for those who knew what to look for, it was a signal. The wolves had shown their teeth, not realizing they were circling a lion in sheep's clothing. Tomorrow they would expect to find a frightened widow, ready to submit to their demands. They would learn their mistake far too late. Greater than. In the fading light of evening, Sarah descended into her root cellar, lighting a lantern that illuminated walls lined with preserved foods and dry goods. But behind a false shelf, hidden from prying eyes, lay the true heart of her sanctuary, Here, spread across a small desk, rested the remnants of another life. Her fingers traced the worn leather of a gun belt, the metal still gleaming after all these years. The badge beside it had long since been officially retired, but its weight still lived in her memories. U.S. Marshal. 3 words that had once made her the most feared lawwoman in the territory. 20 years ago they'd called her the Ghost, a shadow that haunted the lawless, a legend that moved like smoke and struck like lightning. She'd earned that name in the bloody spring of '73, tracking the notorious Clayton Gang across 5 states. They'd called her a ghost because no one ever saw her coming, 15 hardened killers, and she'd taken them all without ever standing in plain sight. Sarah pulled out an old wanted poster, its edges yellow with age. Her own face stared back at her, younger but with the same steady eyes. The sketch artist had never quite captured her features, a blessing that helped her disappear when the time came. The reward listed for information about the ghost had grown to astronomical sums, but no one ever collected. Few knew the ghost was a woman, and fewer still lived to tell about meeting her. "You can't hunt forever," Marshal Cooper had told her that last day when she'd turned in her badge. "The life burns you out, changes you. Best to disappear while you still can." He'd understood, having made the same choice years before. But he'd taught her one final lesson: how to hide in plain sight, how to build a new life that could serve as both refuge and watchtower. Sarah opened her journal, pages filled with precise handwriting, documenting 15 years of quiet vigilance. She'd chosen Silver Creek carefully, a town small enough to seem insignificant, but positioned at a crucial crossroads. From here, she could monitor the territory's criminal movements while appearing to be nothing more than a simple shopkeeper. The sound of horses outside drew her attention. Through hidden peepholes, she observed 3 more riders joining the Hawkins Gang's advance party. Their arrival brought back memories of her last active case, a brutal gang much like this one, led by a man named Marcus Hawkins. Sarah's hand unconsciously moved to her left side, where a long scar marked their final confrontation. She'd caught up with Hawkins at dawn in a canyon much like the one surrounding Silver Creek. The ensuing firefight had left her wounded and him presumed dead, his body lost in the river's fierce currents. But bodies had a way of turning up alive in this territory. The reports she'd gathered about the current Hawkins Gang suggested their leader shared too many traits with the man she'd fought years ago. The same tactical precision, the same pattern of starting with protection rackets before unleashing full-scale terror. Sarah replaced the badge and papers in their hidden compartment, but kept the gun belt close. Her official reasons for retiring had been documented as injury and age, a story that helped cement her current identity. The truth was more complex. She'd stepped away not from weariness, but from strategy, recognizing that some battles required a longer, quieter approach. Tomorrow, when Morton and his men returned expecting to find a frightened widow, they'd instead be taking their first steps into an elaborate trap. Sarah had spent 15 years preparing for the day when serious trouble would find Silver Creek. Now that it had arrived, she felt a familiar calm settling over her, the same focused readiness that had once made her legend. The ghost hadn't died. She'd simply learned to haunt differently. Greater than. Deputy Tom Parker arrived at Sarah's store just before noon, his boots leaving dusty prints on her freshly swept floor. His face carried the weight of worry that seemed too heavy for his 23 years. Sarah noticed his gun belt had been adjusted higher, just as she'd subtly suggested yesterday. "Mrs. McCall," he began, nervously turning his hat in his hands, "heard about those men who visited you. Morton and his bunch." Sarah measured coffee beans with steady hands, her movements deliberately slow and age-worn. "Oh, those gentlemen? Just some travelers passing through, I expect." "No, ma'am, they're not." Tom's voice dropped lower. "Got a wire from Preston's Crossing. They're advance riders for the Hawkins Gang, 3 dead in Preston's, including Sheriff Mills. I knew him, trained under him for a spell." Sarah paused in her work, studying the young deputy. She saw in him echoes of herself at that age, the same earnest desire to protect, the same raw potential that needed guidance. But she also saw something that worried her, the tendency to confront trouble head-on that had gotten so many young lawmen killed. "That's troubling news indeed," she said carefully. "What does Sheriff Bennett plan to do?" Tom's face fell further. "He's away in Carson City, won't be back for 3 days. Left me to keep the peace, but—" He trailed off, the weight of responsibility evident in his slumped shoulders. "Sit down, deputy," Sarah gestured to a chair by the counter. "Let me tell you a story about the ghost." His eyes lit up immediately. Like most young lawmen, he'd grown up on tales of the legendary marshal. "You know stories about the ghost, Mrs. McCall?" "Oh, yes," Sarah smiled, the irony hidden behind her grandmotherly expression. "My late husband spoke of the time the ghost took down the Clayton gang. Did you know they never saw their hunter? Not once in 5 states." Tom leaned forward eagerly. "But how?" 15 men, and not one ever spotted the ghost. "Because," Sarah explained, casually reorganizing her shelf of ammunition, "the ghost understood that confrontation isn't always the answer. Sometimes the best way to fight is to make your enemy think they're winning until it's too late." She watched understanding slowly dawn in Tom's eyes. "You mean, instead of confronting Morton's men—" "Sometimes a deputy's job isn't to stop trouble," Sarah said softly, "but to observe it, understand it, and be ready when the right moment comes." Tom nodded thoughtfully, his hand moving away from his gun. "Like how the ghost worked. Patient, strategic." "Exactly." Sarah patted his arm. "Now, why don't you tell me everything you've noticed about our visitors? Every detail matters." As Tom shared his observations, Sarah felt both pride and concern. The boy had good instincts, noticing things others might miss. He'd spotted the military precision in Morton's men's movements, their practiced way of watching streets and doorways, how they always worked in pairs. "Keep watching," she advised as he prepared to leave, "but don't let them know you're watching." "And Tom?" She caught his eye. "Maybe spend some time practicing your draw behind the livery, where no one can see." After he left, Sarah added notes to her hidden ledger. Tom had confirmed her suspicions about Morton's men having military training. More importantly, she'd given the young deputy a task that would keep him occupied and out of direct confrontation while she laid her groundwork. She felt a familiar pang of guilt, using Tom's admiration for the ghost to manipulate him. But better that than having another young lawman's death on her conscience. When the time came, she'd need him prepared, but alive. Through her window, she watched him walk down the street, his posture already showing more confidence and control. He'd survive this, she decided, and maybe, just maybe, learn enough to become the kind of lawman this territory needed. Greater than. Night had settled over Silver Creek when Sarah finally revealed the true nature of her store's inventory. Behind the false wall of her root cellar, past the preserved foods and dry goods, lay a room that would have shocked her customers and terrified her enemies. Gun racks lined one wall, each weapon meticulously maintained. Not the simple rifles and shotguns a shopkeeper might stock, but precisely chosen arms ranging from delicate derringers to heavy rifles capable of reaching targets half a mile away. Each had been modified for accuracy and reliability by her own skilled hands. "Time to wake up, old friends," she whispered, running her fingers along a custom-made Colt Lightning. She'd used it to take down the Clayton Gang's lookouts, the short barrel making it perfect for close work. Beside it rested a Henry rifle, its stock marked with notches she'd never explained to anyone. But firearms were just the beginning. Sarah moved to a heavy trunk, its lock responding to a complex sequence of turns. Inside lay the tools that had earned her the name Ghost, specialized equipment gathered over decades of hunting men who thought themselves untouchable. Mirror arrays that could redirect sunlight to blind pursuers, smoke charges that could fill a room in seconds, thin wire that could be strung across paths, invisible until the crucial moment. Each item had its purpose. Each had proven its worth in past operations. Sarah began her preparations methodically. First, she loaded her hidden caches throughout the store. A derringer went beneath the counter, another behind the flour barrel. Ammunition was distributed to concealed points where she might need to reload. Every placement was carefully planned to ensure she'd never be more than 2 steps from a weapon. The store itself was a masterpiece of tactical design, though none would recognize it as such. The heavy oak shelves could stop bullets. The hanging lanterns were positioned to cast shadows in specific patterns, creating blind spots she could exploit. Even the creaky floorboards were intentional, allowing her to track movement by sound alone. Moving to her workbench, Sarah began preparing specialized ammunition. She'd learned early that superior firepower wasn't about having the biggest guns, it was about having the right ammunition for each situation. Some rounds were loaded light to reduce noise, others heavy to penetrate cover. Each was marked with tiny notches she could identify by touch in darkness. A secret panel in the wall revealed her communication system, a network of bells and wires running through the walls and under the streets. Some connected to warning triggers she'd placed around town, others to the homes of trusted allies. Simple technology, but effective. She'd learned from Marshall Cooper that complexity was the enemy of reliability. Sarah checked her timing devices next, clockwork mechanisms that could create distractions or trigger effects at precise moments. These had saved her life more than once, making enemies think she was in one place while she struck from another. The most crucial preparations, however, were the ones nobody would notice. She adjusted merchandise on shelves to provide clear shooting lanes, moved boxes to create cover positions, ensured that every mirror and window gave her views of approach angles while appearing completely ordinary. Finally, she opened a small case containing her most precious resource, information. Maps of the town marked with distances and fields of fire, detailed notes on Morton's men, their habits, patterns, weaknesses. Intelligence gathered over days of patient observation while playing the role of frightened widow. Sarah allowed herself a grim smile as she made final adjustments to her preparations. The Hawkins Gang thought they were dealing with an easy target. Instead, they were walking into a killing ground designed by someone who'd spent 15 years perfecting every detail. Through her window, she watched Morton's men drinking in the saloon, celebrating their imagined victory over a helpless widow. Let them drink. Let them grow confident. Everything was ready. The ghost was about to remind the territory why outlaws once feared the dark. Greater than. Morning brought Morton and his men back to Sarah's store, just as the town clock struck 9. This time, they didn't bother with pretense. They pushed through the door as a group, their boot heels striking the wooden floor like hammer blows. "Time's up, Mrs. McCall," Morton announced, spreading his men through the store. 2 blocked the entrance, another watched the back door, while Morton and his lieutenant approached the counter. "Have you considered our generous offer?" Sarah clutched her shawl, noting their positions with a practiced eye. The man by the back door was favoring his right leg, a weakness she filed away for later. I have, Mr. Morton, but I truly don't have the means to pay for protection." Morton's friendly facade cracked. He slammed his hand on the counter, making the display jars rattle. "I don't think you understand your situation, widow. Things happen to businesses that don't cooperate. Bad things." To demonstrate his point, his lieutenant began casually knocking items off shelves. Expensive merchandise crashed to the floor: coffee, sugar, ammunition. Sarah flinched at each crash, but her eyes caught every detail, the way they moved, their reaction times, how they coordinated without obvious signals. "Please," she begged, her voice trembling perfectly. "My store is all I have." "Then you should take better care of it," Morton growled. He reached across the counter, grabbing her wrist. 20% of your weekly earnings buys our protection, or maybe we'll just take the whole store as payment." The instant his hand touched her, Sarah's demeanor shifted, just for a fraction of a second, but long enough for Morton to feel something change. Their eyes met, and for a moment he glimpsed something in her gaze that made him step back. "Is there a problem here?" Deputy Parker's voice cut through the tension. He stood in the doorway, hand resting near his gun. Morton released Sarah's wrist, his friendly mask sliding back into place. "No problem at all, Deputy. Just having a business discussion with Mrs. McCall." Tom's young face was tight with anger, but Sarah caught his eye and gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head. "Remember the ghost lessons," her look said. "Not yet." "Seems like the discussion is over," Tom said carefully, maintaining his position without reaching for his weapon. "For now," Morton agreed with a cold smile. He turned back to Sarah. "Think carefully about what we discussed, Mrs. McCall. We'll return tomorrow for your answer. Final answer." As they filed out, the lieutenant deliberately knocked over her prized display case of imported goods. Glass shattered across the floor, spreading like frozen lightning. "Mrs. McCall, let me help." Tom started forward, but Sarah held up her hand. "No, Deputy, let them get clear first." Her voice had changed, carrying an authority that made Tom blink in surprise. Then, just as quickly, she was the widow again, wringing her hands over the destruction. Only after Morton's men had ridden well down the street did Sarah begin cleaning up. She worked methodically, analyzing every piece of information the confrontation had provided. Their coordinated movements confirmed military training. The way they'd positioned themselves showed experience in controlling spaces. But most importantly, she'd seen the flash of uncertainty in Morton's eyes when she'd let her mask slip. "They'll be back at dawn," she said quietly, more to herself than to Tom. "With more men, that's their pattern." "How do you know they're—" Tom started to ask, then stopped as Sarah gave him a look that seemed to age her 20 years in reverse. "Deputy, I need you to send a wire for me. But first, there's something you should know about who really minds this store." The sun climbed higher over Silver Creek as Sarah began sharing secrets she'd kept for 15 years. Tomorrow would bring violence, but today she had a young deputy to prepare for what was coming. Greater than. By sunset, Silver Creek had begun to transform, though few would notice the subtle changes. Old Man Tucker at the livery stable started moving his best horses to the hidden corral behind his property. The blacksmith's wife hung red curtains in their window, a signal that would mean nothing to most observers. Even the town drunk perpetually slouched in front of the saloon seemed to watch Morton's men with unusually sharp eyes. Sarah stood in her store's doorway, observing it all while pretending to sweep. Deputy Parker stood beside her, still reeling from the revelations of the past hour. "All this time," he whispered, "every story you told me about the ghost—" "Was a lesson," Sarah finished, her voice low. "Just like the red curtains at the smithy. Mary's father rode with me when I hunted the Clayton gang. Some debts don't expire." As if on cue, a weathered cowboy rode past, leading a string of pack horses. To most, he looked like any other drifter, but Sarah noted the distinctive way he sat his saddle, the carefully maintained rifle under his duster. "John Hawkins," she murmured. "Best tracker I ever worked with. Seems he got my message." More riders were arriving, filtering into town, one or two at a time. A gambler at the saloon, a cattle buyer at the hotel, a traveling preacher leading a mule. Each unremarkable alone, but together they formed a net drawing tight around Morton's men. "How many?" Tom asked, understanding dawning in his eyes. 12 so far, more coming. Every one of them owes the ghost a favor." Sarah's smile held no warmth. I spent 15 years building this network, preparing for the day serious trouble found Silver Creek. Inside her store, Sarah showed Tom the hidden signals built into seemingly ordinary items. The arrangement of certain goods in her window told arriving allies where to find their cache supplies. The pattern of lantern lights at night would convey messages across town. "But Morton's men," Tom protested. "They're watching everything." "They're watching an old widow's store," Sarah corrected. Meanwhile, John's setting up shooting positions in the livery loft. Mary's husband is rigging the smithy with surprises. Even Old Man Tucker has a role to play. As if to emphasize her point, Tucker began a coughing fit that drew Morton's attention, allowing one of Sarah's people to slip past unseen. Through her window, Sarah watched Morton's lieutenant posting guards. Their professional caution would work against them. They were so focused on obvious threats that they missed the subtle shifting of the ground beneath their feet. "Tonight they'll send riders to their main force," she explained to Tom. "Standard procedure before taking a town. But the routes they'll use," she smiled. "Well, let's just say my friends know those trails better than any map." A messenger boy ran past, delivering what appeared to be ordinary telegrams. But Sarah knew each message contained coded warnings and instructions for her arriving allies. "Deputy," she said softly, "tonight you need to be conspicuously busy at the far end of town. When the shooting starts, people will remember seeing you there." Tom straightened, understanding, "Giving you deniability, like the ghost used to do." "The ghost never died," Sarah corrected, checking her hidden derringer. "She just learned to work differently. Now, go. Your presence here is drawing attention." As Tom left, Sarah returned to her routine, playing the nervous widow to perfection. But beneath her act, she was counting allies, calculating angles, coordinating pieces of an elaborate trap 15 years in the making. Morton's men thought they were watching her. In reality, they were being watched by some of the most dangerous people in the territory, all hidden behind the ordinary faces of a small town's life. The game was moving faster now. Soon, the Hawkins Gang would learn why some legends never truly fade. Greater than. Dusk settled over Silver Creek like a held breath. Sarah moved through her evening routine with practiced calm, though every movement served a deeper purpose. As she brought in her display goods, each item was replaced with identical ones filled with rock salt and broken glass, improvised ammunition that would turn the store's very merchandise into weapons. Through her window, she watched Morton's men checking their positions for the night. They'd grown more cautious, perhaps sensing the subtle changes in the town's atmosphere. Their eyes tracked movement, hands never far from weapons, but they still saw only what they expected to see: shopkeepers closing up, farmers heading home, the ordinary rhythms of a small town ending its day. "Evening, Mrs. McCall," Mary from the smithy called, passing by with her shopping basket. To casual observers, it was a typical neighborly exchange. But Sarah noted the coded message in the way Mary adjusted her shawl. The Hawkins Gang's main force had been spotted less than half a day's ride out. "Good evening, dear," Sarah replied, her own hand motion confirming receipt of the message. "Mind the weather. Feels like a storm coming." Inside her store, Sarah completed her final preparations. She wound the clockwork mechanisms that would create distractions when needed, checked the tripwires that would drop strategic shelves, verified that every hidden weapon was oiled, loaded, and positioned perfectly. "Just an old widow, closing up shop," she murmured to herself, remembering Marshall Cooper's lessons. "The best ambush is the one they walk into while looking for something else." A floorboard creaked behind her. John Hawkins, moving silent as a cat despite his years. "East Ridge is covered," he reported softly. "Got Chapman and Rodriguez up there with the long guns. Town's wrapped tight as a drum." Sarah nodded, checking her hidden ledger one final time. "Their reinforcements?" 40 riders near as we can tell, moving fast. traveling heavy with guns. John's weathered face showed concern. "It's him, Sarah." Marcus Hawkins himself recognized his way of setting march order. The name sent a familiar chill down her spine, her hand unconsciously touching the old scar on her side. "I thought as much. Same patterns, same tactics. He'll remember the ghost's ways." "Good." Sarah's smile was cold. "Let him look for a ghost while we fight, like flesh and blood." Through the gathering darkness, she spotted Deputy Parker making his conspicuous rounds at the far end of town, just as instructed. The boy had learned quickly. His obvious presence there would establish alibis, draw attention away from the real action to come. The town settled into nervous quiet, but Sarah's trained ear caught the subtle sounds of preparation, the soft click of rifles being checked in the livery loft, the muffled ring of the smithy's hammer forging makeshift caltrops to slow mounted charges, the whisper of boot leather as her people moved into final positions. "Like old times," John murmured, nostalgia mixing with anticipation in his voice. "Better," Sarah corrected. "We're not chasing them this time. They're coming to us, into ground we've prepared for 15 years. She made one final check of her store's defenses, the innocent-looking displays that would provide cover, the carefully arranged mirrors that would let her track movement throughout the space, the reinforced walls and shutters that would turn her shop into a fortress. "Get some rest," she told John. "Tomorrow we remind them why they used to fear the dark." As her old friend slipped away, Sarah lit her evening lamps, their placement carefully calculated to create blind spots and shadows she could exploit. To anyone watching, she was just a widow, following her usual routine. Let them watch, she thought. Let them think they understand what they're seeing. By this time tomorrow, the Hawkins gang would learn the difference between seeing and understanding, if any of them lived to learn anything at all. Greater than. The first shots came just before midnight, when Morton's men tried to silence the town's watchdog. 3 quick reports from a suppressed pistol, followed by absolute silence. But instead of a dead dog, they found an empty collar attached to a clockwork device, one of Sarah's many deceptions. "They're testing us," Sarah whispered to John, both hidden in the store's shadowed upper floor, checking response times, looking for law enforcement patterns. Below, 2 of Morton's men crept past her store, moving with military precision. They were good, she had to admit, staying in shadows, maintaining coverage, watching each other's blind spots. But Sarah had spent 15 years memorizing every creaking board and loose stone in Silver Creek. She didn't need to see them to track their movement. A sharp whistle cut through the night, one of Morton's men signaling all clear. But Sarah recognized the sound for what it really was, a signal to start the real operation. Right on cue, fire erupted from the far end of town. The livery stable burst into flames, drawing attention and creating chaos. "Clever," Sarah murmured, using the fire to mask their main move. Through her carefully positioned mirrors, she watched Morton's full team emerging from hiding, no longer bothering with stealth. The fire would keep Deputy Parker and any other law enforcement busy, leaving them free to handle their real targets. 6 men approached her store, weapons drawn. Morton led them personally, confident in their superior numbers. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Everything was proceeding exactly as she'd predicted. The first trap triggered when they reached her porch. Hidden wires caught their feet, sending 2 men sprawling. Before they could recover, sacks of flour rigged to the porch roof split open, covering them in white powder. In the dark, it seemed harmless, but Sarah knew the flour would gum up their weapons, make their footing treacherous. "What the hell?" Morton snarled, just as Sarah's first real surprise activated. The seemingly decorative wind chimes around her porch erupted with bright magnesium flares, temporarily blinding anyone looking in her direction. In the same instant, every window shutter slammed shut automatically, driven by counterweights she'd installed years ago. From the livery came the sharp crack of a rifle, John's partner taking advantage of the confusion to pick off one of Morton's men with a leg shot. Non-lethal, but effective. They needed prisoners for questioning. Morton's men returned fire blindly, their shots harmlessly embedding in Sarah's reinforced walls. She'd built her kill house well, every angle calculated, every wall prepared. Through her loopholes, she watched them scrambling for cover that didn't exist. "Shooters in the livery," one man shouted. "They planned this." "Of course we did," Sarah whispered, squeezing the trigger of her specially modified Henry rifle. The shot caught Morton's lieutenant in the shoulder, spinning him into his companion. Both went down hard. More shots rang out across town, her people engaging Morton's men from prepared positions. Each shot carefully placed, designed to wound rather than kill. They needed information more than corpses. Morton, proving his tactical experience, immediately recognized the trap. "Fall back," he ordered. "We're too exposed." But retreat wasn't as simple as he imagined. Hidden caltrops scattered by the smithy's wife shredded their horses' hooves. Every escape route led them into pre-sighted firing lanes. Even the town drunk proved deadly accurate with a rifle, years of pretense hiding an expert marksman. In less than 5 minutes, Morton's advance force lay groaning in the street. All wounded, none dead. Only Morton himself remained standing, pressed against a water trough, his practiced calm cracking. "Ghost!" he shouted suddenly, understanding dawning too late. "This is ghost work." Sarah chambered another round, allowing herself to savor the moment. "Welcome to Silver Creek, Mr. Morton," she whispered, though he couldn't hear. "Your education is just beginning." Greater than. Dawn painted Silver Creek's main street in shades of pink and gold, revealing the aftermath of the night's violence. Morton's men lay in the jail cells, their wounds tended but their spirits broken. Outside Sarah's store, blood-stained flour marked the scene of their defeat, a stark reminder that appearances could be deceiving. Sarah stood in her doorway, still playing the role of the shaken widow despite her victory. Deputy Parker worked the crowd of onlookers, spreading the official story. Brave townspeople had fought off bandits while the sheriff was away. But Morton, watching through the jail window, had seen enough to know better. "Send for Mrs. McCall," he told Parker when the deputy brought breakfast. "Need to discuss damages to her store." His voice was carefully neutral, but his eyes burned with newfound respect and fear. Sarah made him wait 2 hours, using the time to signal her people into new positions. The Hawkins Gang's main force would arrive soon, and she needed everything perfect for what came next. When she finally entered the jail, she maintained her widow's stoop despite Morton's intense scrutiny. "Must have been frightening," Morton said softly, watching her every move. "All that shooting, those terrible men attacking your store." His words dripped with sarcasm. Sarah wrung her hands, the perfect picture of nervous energy. "Oh, yes, terrible, but the good Lord protects." "Does he now?" Morton leaned forward. Strange kind of protection, almost like someone knew we were coming, had traps ready, almost like... He paused, studying her face. "Like ghost work." Sarah let her mask slip just slightly, just enough to show him the steel behind her eyes. "The ghost? That old legend? Surely not." 20 years ago, Morton continued, his voice taking on a teaching tone, "I served with a man named Marcus Hawkins. He taught us about the ghost, taught us the signs to watch for, tripwires, flower bombs, precision shots to wound, not kill, and most importantly..." He tapped the bar's meaning fully. "The ghost never worked alone." Sarah settled into the chair across from his cell, her widow's stoop vanishing like morning mist. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of authority that had once made outlaws tremble. "Marcus always was observant," she said quietly, "even after I put a bullet in him." Morton's face went pale. His hands gripped the bars tighter. "It was you, all those years ago in the canyon." He survived, I see. Sarah's smile held no warmth. Tell me about him. Is he still favoring his left side where my shot took him? Before Morton could respond, John burst in. Riders spotted. Big group, moving fast. His casual demeanor was gone, replaced by the deadly focus that had made him the ghost's best tracker. Sarah stood, all pretense abandoned. How many? 40, maybe more. Marcus is leading them personally. John's eyes gleamed. He's still got that black stallion, still rides like cavalry. Morton watched this exchange with growing understanding. You're all ghost riders, he whispered. The whole town. Not the whole town, Sarah corrected. Just enough. A network I spent 15 years building, preparing for the day Marcus tried to resurface. She moved to leave, then paused. You're right about one thing, Mr. Morton. The ghost never worked alone. That's what Marcus never understood. He thought he was hunting a single rider. He was hunting an army, Morton finished, finally understanding the trap they'd walked into. Sarah's smile was cold as winter steel. No, Mr. Morton. He was hunting a legend, and legends, properly maintained, become something far more dangerous than any army. She left him then, striding out with the fluid grace of a predator. Through the jail window, Morton watched her transformation spread. The quiet widow becoming the deadly ghost of justice he'd heard stories about all his life. And for the first time, he pitied his boss. Marcus Hawkins thought he was riding in to conquer a town. Instead, he was walking into the carefully laid trap of an enemy he'd never truly understood. Greater than, word spread through the territory like wildfire. Riders, pushing their horses hard, carried the news from town to town. The ghost had returned. In saloons and telegraph offices, on cattle drives and in mining camps, the old stories emerged from memory, growing with each retelling. In Silver Creek's saloon, Sarah sat quietly in a corner, listening to the legends of her own making. Trail hands and townspeople crowded the bar, each adding their version of the ghost's exploits. Heard tell the ghost once took down 12 men without firing a shot, a weathered cowboy claimed, just appeared and disappeared like smoke until they surrendered from pure terror. That's nothing, another countered. My pa saw the ghost clear out the Wilson gang. Said there was just shadows and gun smoke, and when it cleared, 6 men were disarmed and hog-tied. Deputy Parker caught Sarah's eye from across the room, now seeing the truth behind every story she'd ever told him. She gave him a subtle nod, confirming the unspoken question in his gaze. Yes, those had been lessons, not just tales. The saloon's telegraph operator burst in, waving a handful of papers. Messages coming in from all over. 3 gangs spotted heading this way. Seems Marcus Hawkins is calling in allies. Sarah noted how the man's eyes flickered to her briefly. More of the town was figuring it out, connecting the pieces. The widow's precise movements, the 2 accurate stories, the perfectly planned defense of the town. Let them come, John said quietly, materializing beside her table. Word of last night's fight is spreading too. 7 men taken down without a single death, all their shots finding arms and legs with surgical precision. Ghost work, someone in the crowd muttered, and the word rippled through the saloon. Eyes turned toward Sarah's corner, but she maintained her widow's demeanor even as she processed the tactical implications of the incoming messages. Marcus is gathering forces, she murmured to John. He recognizes my signature, knows he'll need numbers to overwhelm us. A young rider from the telegraph office approached their table, trying to mask his nervousness. Ma'am, got a message from Carson City. Says it's for the ghost. He hesitated. Operator there said to deliver it to the widow McCall. Sarah took the telegram, noting how the boy's hand trembled slightly when their fingers brushed. The mystique was building, turning her back into something more than human. Good. Fear and legend were weapons as effective as any gun. The message was brief. Ghost spotted simultaneously in 3 towns, panic spreading among outlaws, some already running north. others joining Hawkins, territory holding breath. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Her reputation was doing exactly what she'd crafted it to do, multiplying her perceived presence, making enemies see her shadow in every corner. More riders coming in, Tom reported, joining their table. He'd grown more confident since last night, carrying himself like a real lawman now. But not all heading to join Hawkins. Some are riding for us. Say they're here to stand with the ghost. Old debts, John explained. Every person the ghost helped over the years, every life saved, every wrong righted, they're coming to repay. Through the saloon's window, Sarah watched dust clouds rising on the horizon. More riders approaching, but whether friend or foe remained to be seen. The legend she'd crafted was drawing them all in, moths to a flame. Marshal Cooper used to say, she mused quietly, that a legend's power isn't in its truth, but in its effect on others. Make them believe in the ghost, and they'll defeat themselves before you fire a shot. As if to emphasize her point, another telegram arrived. Hawkins gathering army. Stop. Over 100 riders. Stop. But men deserting. Stop. Say ghost can't be fought. Stop. Sarah folded the telegram carefully, tucking it into her pocket. Marcus was coming with an army, but he was also coming with men already half defeated by fear of a legend. Her legend. The ghost had returned, and the territory trembled at her name. Greater than. Marcus Hawkins announced his arrival with a show of force that would have terrified any normal town. His riders appeared on every ridge surrounding Silver Creek, their weapons glinting in the morning sun. Over 100 men, positioned to cut off all escape routes. Sarah watched them through her store window, counting units, noting positions. Her trained eye caught details others might miss. The mix of professional gunmen and common thugs. The tactical positioning that revealed Marcus's military background. He's still good, she admitted to John. See how he's placed his best men on the high ground? Artillery positions if he had any. Town surrounded, Tom reported, hurrying into the store. The young deputy's voice stayed steady despite the pressure. They've cut the telegraph lines, blocked all the roads. Sarah nodded unsurprised. Classic siege positioning. Marcus always did favor overwhelming force. She moved to her hidden map table, where markers showed both enemy and friendly positions. What he doesn't know is that we planned for this 15 years ago. Through her network of mirrors and observation points, she watched Marcus's men tightening their noose around Silver Creek. They moved with practiced coordination, cutting off water supplies, establishing sniper positions, preparing for a prolonged engagement. Ma'am, Tom hesitated, we're outnumbered at least 5 to 1. Are we? Sarah's smile was knowing. She nodded to John, who pulled a lever disguised as a shop fitting. Somewhere beneath the town, machinery rumbled to life. Silver Creek has secrets, deputy. Watch and learn. The first surprise came when Marcus's men tried to secure the water tower. They found the ladder booby-trapped and the structure rigged with defensive positions that hadn't been visible from a distance. Sarah's people had prepared every high point in town with similar care. First rule of siege warfare, Sarah explained as they watched Marcus's men fall back in confusion. Control the high ground, unless the high ground itself is a trap. Marcus himself appeared then, riding his black stallion down the main street like a conquering general. He'd aged since Sarah had last seen him, but still carried himself with military bearing. The scar on his left side, her parting gift from their last encounter, showed clearly against his white shirt. "Ghost!" His voice boomed across the empty street. "I know you're here. Show yourself!" Sarah stepped away from her window, gesturing for her people to maintain positions. Through her carefully arranged mirrors, she watched Marcus dismount, his movements revealing old injuries. "He's favoring that left side more than he shows," she noted. "Remember that. It affects his draw, makes him compensate by turning slightly." A shot cracked out. one of Marcus's snipers firing at movement in the church tower, but instead of hitting a defender, the shot revealed one of Sarah's mechanical decoys. More shots followed, each one exposing another prepared position without yielding any casualties. They're wasting ammunition, Tom realized. Every shot tells us where their shooters are, and every position they find is one we prepared them to find. Sarah moved more markers on her map. Marcus thinks he's executing a siege. Actually, he's deploying exactly where we want him. The day continued with similar probing attacks, each one carefully measured by Marcus, each one falling into Sarah's prepared defenses. His men grew increasingly frustrated, firing at shadows and finding only clever mechanisms designed to draw their attention. "Ghost!" Marcus called out again as evening approached. "You can't hide forever. We have enough men to storm this town 10 times over." Sarah finally moved to her door, standing just inside, where she knew Marcus could sense, but not see her. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of legend. "Coming for me with an army, Marcus? You always did need help with the simplest tasks." She closed the door before he could respond, but not before seeing the flash of uncertainty cross his face. The siege of Silver Creek had begun, but like everything else in this conflict, it wasn't what it appeared to be. In the gathering darkness, Sarah's people moved like shadows through hidden passages and prepared positions, while above them, Marcus's army settled in for a siege that was actually a trap. Greater than. They came in ones and twos, slipping through Marcus's lines like water through a sieve. Each arrival proved why they'd once ridden with the Ghost, men and women who could move unseen, strike unseen, vanish unseen. By midnight, Sarah's store had become a reunion of legends that most people thought long dead or retired. Catherine Blake, Sarah greeted the elegant woman who appeared in her root cellar, having navigated the hidden tunnel network. "Still wearing fine dresses to a gunfight, I see. The best disguise is the one they're too polite to question." Catherine smoothed her expensive skirts, beneath which Sarah knew were at least 3 derringers and a knife. Besides, someone has to maintain standards. Thomas Quarter Jenkins arrived next, the former cavalry scout who could shoot a quarter out of the air at 30 paces. Then came the Martinez twins, whose skill with knives had saved Sarah's life more times than she could count. Each arrival brought not just their skills, but their own networks of information and support. "Marcus has men watching every road," Quarter reported, cleaning his specialized rifle. "But he's thinking like military, looking for traditional approaches, defensive positions. While we come and go like ghosts," one of the Martinez twins, Sarah could never tell them apart, grinned wickedly. Just like old times. In her store's hidden command center, Sarah updated her maps with the intelligence each new arrival brought. Marcus had indeed gathered a small army, but its very size worked against him. Too many men to feed, too many positions to maintain, too many opportunities for her people to exploit. "He's got men here, here, and here," Quarter pointed to the map. "Heavy coverage on obvious approaches, but he's left gaps a good horseman could slip through." "Or a woman in a fine carriage," Catherine added. "Already arranged for 3 supply wagons to come through tomorrow. His men will be too busy tipping their hats to notice what's hidden under the grain sacks." Tom Parker watched these legends with barely concealed awe, finally seeing the full scope of the network Sarah had built. These weren't just former riders, they were masters of deception who'd turned their skills to living double lives. "Quarter runs a shooting gallery in Carson City," Sarah explained to her protege. "Catherine owns a dressmaker's shop in Denver. The twins, well, best not to ask about the twins. The point is, we didn't just retire, we adapted." "Like you with the store," Tom nodded, understanding dawning. "Every normal life hiding something else." "Speaking of hiding," John interrupted, entering through the secret door, "got word from our spotters. Marcus is planning something for dawn, moving his best men into position. Sarah studied the map, seeing the pattern in Marcus's deployments. He's thinking like a military man again, expecting us to defend traditionally, focusing on strong points. While we're already behind his lines, Catherine smiled, checking her hidden weapons. Really, Sarah, he hasn't learned it all, has he? The gathering of legends continued through the night, each arrival strengthening not just their fighting force, but their web of deception. Marcus was watching for an army to defend Silver Creek. Instead, an invisible network was already moving through his forces like a ghost through walls. "Remember Carson Valley?" one of the twins asked, prompting knowing smiles from the veterans. "When they thought they had us surrounded?" "Only to find we'd been picking them apart from the inside for days," Quarter finished. "Marcus is making the same mistake. Too focused on the obvious threat to see the real danger." Sarah watched her old companions preparing for battle, each falling naturally into their roles despite the years apart. They weren't young anymore, but they'd grown craftier with age, more patient, more skilled at turning everyday life into tactical advantage. "Dawn's coming soon," she announced, seeing the first hints of light through her window. "Marcus expects us to be tired, afraid, weakened by his siege. Time to show him why the ghost's legend never died." Around her store, hidden in plain sight, a dozen of the territory's most dangerous people nodded grimly. The siege of Silver Creek was about to become something Marcus Hawkins never expected, a lesson in why some legends are best left alone. Greater than. Dawn found Deputy Tom Parker exactly where Sarah had positioned him, manning the jail alone, guarding Morton and his captured men. To Marcus's observers, it looked like a foolish deployment of forces, leaving a green deputy to handle dangerous prisoners. In reality, it was Tom's first real test as the ghost's student. "Awful quiet in there, boy," Morton called from his cell, his voice carrying deliberate menace. "Must be lonely being the only law left in town while the ghost plays her games." Tom checked his gun, just as Sarah had taught him, maintaining the precise distance from the cells she'd specified. Every move was measured, every position carefully chosen. "Comfortable enough, Morton? Need anything?" "Just wondering when your friend Mrs. McCall is going to admit what she's done to you all." Morton pressed against the bars. "Using this whole town as pieces in her private war, getting good folk killed for old vendettas." The deputy's hand stayed steady on his gun, remembering Sarah's lessons. "Funny thing about the ghost stories," he replied, keeping his voice casual. "They never mention good folk getting killed, just outlaws facing justice." A commotion outside drew Tom's attention. Through the jail window, he spotted 3 of Marcus's men approaching, a probe testing the town's weakest apparent point, just as Sarah had predicted. "Company coming, Deputy." Morton's smile turned predatory. "Hope you're ready for real trouble, not just playing at peace officer." Tom took his position exactly as rehearsed, angled to watch both the cells and the door while staying out of direct fire lines. Sarah's voice echoed in his memory. "Let them think you're young and nervous. Fear makes men careless." The door burst open, 3 gunmen filling the entrance with practiced efficiency. Their leader, a scarred man with cold eyes, sized up the situation. One young deputy, obviously outmatched. "Step aside, boy," the scarred man ordered. "We're here for Morton. No need for you to die today." Tom let his gun hand tremble slightly, playing his role. "Can't do that. Sworn to uphold the law." "Law?" the gunman laughed. "Look around, kid. Town's surrounded. Ghost's got you all fighting her private war. Only law here is survival." "Interesting perspective." Tom's voice shifted, dropping its nervous edge. His stance changed subtly, settling into the precise position Sarah had drilled into him. "Want to test that theory?" The gunman's eyes narrowed, sensing something wrong, but not understanding what. "Last chance, boy. Move or die." Tom smiled, not his usual friendly grin, but the cold expression he'd learned from watching Sarah. You've got it backward, mister. That was your last chance. Everything happened exactly as Sarah had predicted. The gunman, focused on Tom, never noticed the jail's hidden defenses. When they moved to shoot, tripwires dropped weighted nets from above. Their shots went wild as they stumbled, giving Tom the crucial seconds needed to demonstrate just how much he'd learned. 3 shots, each placed with surgical precision, 3 men disarmed and wounded, just as the ghost would have done it. No deaths, but no questions about his skill either. Jesus, Morton whispered from his cell. She trained you. Still learning, Tom replied modestly, securing the wounded men. Through his window, he spotted Catherine's carriage approaching, right on schedule. The supply delivery would take the prisoners to a secure location, maintaining the illusion of the jail's importance while hiding its true role as a trap. You're more ghost than lawman now, Morton observed, watching Tom's precise movements. No, sir, Tom corrected, his badge catching the morning light. I'm both. That's what she's been teaching me all along. Law and legend working together. As Catherine's men efficiently transferred the prisoners, Tom sent the prearranged signal to Sarah's store. The first test was complete. Marcus's forces had probed the jail exactly as predicted, finding exactly what Sarah wanted them to find, a young deputy who was far more than he appeared. In her store, Sarah watched through her mirror network and smiled. Her student had learned well. More importantly, he'd learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes the best way to uphold the law was to become something more than just a lawman. Greater than. Beneath Silver Creek's dusty streets lay a secret that Marcus Hawkins would have killed to discover. Sarah led Tom through the tunnel network, their lanterns casting dancing shadows on carefully reinforced walls. What looked like mining tunnels to the uninitiated were actually a complex web of defensive positions and escape routes. 15 years of work, Sarah explained, running her hand along a timber support. Every delivery of mining supplies was actually construction material. Every cave-in we reported was covering new excavation. The main tunnel ran the length of the town, wide enough for 2 people to walk abreast. Smaller passages branched off at regular intervals, each marked with subtle signs only Sarah's people could read. The whole system was a masterpiece of tactical engineering. Here, Sarah pointed to what appeared to be a natural rock formation. Listening post. You can hear everything happening in the saloon above. Marcus has turned it into his command center, not realizing we can monitor every word. Tom marveled at the sophistication. The whole town's hollow underneath. Not hollow. Prepared. Sarah led him to a larger chamber filled with supplies. Ammunition, food, medical supplies, everything needed for a prolonged siege, but more importantly, she pulled a lever disguised as a support beam. Somewhere above, machinery whirred to life. Through a hidden observation port, they watched Marcus's men scrambling as mechanical noises emerged from seemingly random points around town. Distraction devices, Sarah explained, makes them waste time and ammunition investigating false threats. But watch this. She pulled another lever. The ground beneath a group of Marcus's scouts trembled slightly. Not enough to notice if you weren't looking for it, but enough to make them nervous, keep them off balance. The whole town's rigged, Tom realized. You can affect what's happening anywhere above us. Control the ground beneath their feet, Sarah nodded, and you control their movements. Marcus is up there playing chess while we're changing the board itself. They moved deeper into the network, passing storage rooms filled with weapons, communication stations linked to surface observation posts, and medical bays ready for casualties. Every 20 yards, hidden escape routes led to the surface, each concealed by years of careful landscaping. Jesus, a voice called from a side tunnel. Quarter emerged, grinning. Place is even more elaborate than you described, Sarah. Just found the range room. The range room turned out to be a long chamber where Sarah's people could practice shooting without surface noise. Spent bullets collected in sand traps could be melted down, and recast in the adjacent workshop. "Built this first," Sarah said, checking the ammunition stores. "Needed somewhere my people could maintain their skills without drawing attention. Every widow, shopkeeper, and farmer who's part of our network trained down here." More of Sarah's old companions appeared from various tunnels, each having spent the day familiarizing themselves with the underground network. The Martinez twins had already mapped alternate routes to every major building. Catherine had established a communications center, coordinating their hidden movements. "Marcus is getting frustrated," Catherine reported. "His men keep chasing shadows above while we move freely below. He's doubled the guards, but they're watching empty streets while we use these tunnels." Sarah led them to her underground command center, where maps showed both surface and tunnel positions. "He's thinking like a military commander, expecting us to defend buildings and strong points. Instead—" "We're everywhere and nowhere," Tom finished, finally understanding the full scope of what Sarah had built. "The whole town is one big tactical position." "More than that," Sarah corrected. "It's a trap 15 years in the making. Every tunnel, every hidden door, every mechanical system, all designed to slowly drain Marcus's strength while preserving ours." Through carefully positioned listening tubes, they could hear Marcus's men above, their frustration growing, as another search yielded nothing but clever mechanisms and false trails. "Remember," Sarah told her gathered allies, "we're not just fighting a siege, we're teaching Marcus why some legends are better left alone. Let him waste strength searching for ghosts while we become the ground beneath his feet." In the lantern light, shadows danced across walls that had waited years for this moment. Silver Creek's secret heart was finally serving its true purpose, turning a simple town into a weapon that would break Marcus Hawkins once and for all. Greater than. Sarah waited until the darkest hour of night before launching her first true offensive. Marcus's men had settled into their siege positions, growing complacent in their supposed control of Silver Creek's streets. Now they would learn the difference between occupying a town and controlling it. 3 teams, she briefed her gathered allies in the tunnel command center. Catherine takes the east, Martinez twins west. Quarter, you're our high cover. Time to remind them why they used to fear the dark. Above ground, Marcus's sentries noticed nothing unusual at first. Then the oddities began. Supply wagons they'd carefully searched earlier seemed to have shifted position slightly. Ammunition stores showed subtle discrepancies in their counts. Men reported hearing footsteps that led nowhere. "Ghost games," one sentry muttered, drawing closer to his lamplight. He wasn't wrong. Sarah's people moved through prepared routes, using the town's architecture exactly as she'd designed it. Every shadow had been calculated, every blind spot mapped. What looked like solid walls often weren't, and what seemed like open ground frequently concealed surprises. Catherine's team struck first, targeting the gang's ammunition stores. They didn't steal everything. That would be too obvious. Instead, they replaced regular rounds with Sarah's special loads, carefully modified to misfire or fire weak. Future firefights would become increasingly frustrating for Marcus's men. The Martinez twins moved like their namesakes through the western positions. Their expertise with knives meant no one heard a sound as they systematically disabled weapons, cut saddle straps, and marked key men with tiny cuts, just deep enough to unnerve when discovered in the morning. Getting reports of movement, Marcus's voice carried clearly through the listening tubes to Sarah's position. But patrols find nothing, just tricks and shadows. "Because that's all we are tonight," Sarah whispered, though he couldn't hear. "Ghosts in your camp, picking away at your certainty." Quarter's role proved particularly effective. From his hidden perch, he didn't shoot to kill or even wound. Instead, he fired precisely placed shots that created phantom threats, drawing Marcus's men into prepared kill zones where they found nothing but clever mechanical devices and more questions. "They're starting to bunch up," Tom observed through one of Sarah's observation ports, gathering in larger groups, afraid to patrol alone. Fear makes them predictable, Sarah nodded. Watch their patterns change. True to her words, Marcus's men began abandoning their carefully planned positions, clustering together for safety. Each group that formed created new gaps in their coverage, gaps that Sarah's people exploited mercilessly. By midnight, the psychological impact was clear. Marcus's men jumped at shadows, wasted ammunition shooting at mechanical decoys, and reported threats that didn't exist. Their professional military discipline began cracking under the strain of fighting an enemy they couldn't see or understand. Position 3 compromised. A panicked voice reached Sarah through the listening tubes. Found Jones tied up. Says he never saw who did it. Gordon's missing completely. Gordon wasn't missing. He was currently in Sarah's custody, having been separated from his patrol by Catherine's careful misdirection. By morning, he'd be released with a story that would further shake his companion's confidence. They're breaking formation, Quarter reported, via their signal system. Eastern quadrants falling back to defensible positions, abandoning their forward posts completely. Sarah smiled in the darkness of her command center. Every withdrawal, every repositioning played into her plans. Marcus's men were concentrating their forces exactly where she wanted them, pulling back from prepared positions into killing grounds of her choosing. Time for Phase 2, she announced to her waiting allies. Let's show them what happens when they cluster together like spooked cattle. As her people moved to their positions, Sarah took a moment to appreciate the perfection of it all. Marcus had come expecting to besiege a town. Instead, his men were being systematically dismantled by an enemy they couldn't fight, their own growing fear of the dark, their uncertainty about what was real, and their dawning realization that they weren't the hunters here. They were the prey, and the ghost was teaching them why some legends are best left alone. Greater than, Marcus Hawkins proved why he'd survived their last encounter by recognizing the trap just before it closed. They're hurting us. His voice boomed through the pre-dawn darkness. Break apart. Get back to original positions. But Sarah had anticipated this too. As his men tried to redeploy, they found their former positions already occupied by her people. Every strategic point they'd abandoned in their fear was now a deadly obstacle to their return. Ghost Riders in the bell tower, someone shouted, followed by the sharp crack of Quarter's rifle. The shot caught a gang lieutenant in the shoulder, spinning him into his companions. Return fire, Marcus ordered, but when his men pulled their triggers, many found their weapons compromised by the Martinez twins' night work. Those that did fire often launched Sarah's doctored ammunition, their shots falling short or going wild. Catherine's voice carried across the chaos, pitched to sound like it came from multiple directions. Did you really think we'd let you keep working weapons, Marcus? The ghost taught us better than that. The battle erupted across Silver Creek in a series of carefully orchestrated engagements. Each time Marcus's men tried to concentrate their forces, they found themselves caught in deadly crossfires from positions that seemed impossible to hold. They're everywhere! A panic-stricken voice rose above the gunfire, coming up from the ground itself. Sarah moved through her tunnel network, coordinating the defense through her system of signals and mechanical devices. Here she triggered a smoke screen to cover her people's movement. There she activated noisemakers to draw enemy fire away from her actual positions. Watch the pattern, she instructed Tom, who moved beside her. See how they bunch up when pressed, then scatter when flanked? Marcus trained them well, but they're fighting the last war. They expect traditional tactics. Above them, the battle intensified. Marcus's men found themselves caught between obvious threats and hidden ones, never sure which danger was real and which was another of Sarah's mechanisms. South side's breaking, John's voice carried through the communication tubes. They're making a run for the horses. But the horses, thanks to Catherine's careful preparation, had been subtly redistributed during the night. Men running for their mounts found strangers' horses, or none at all, adding to the confusion. Marcus himself proved the most dangerous element, rallying his men with military precision. "Form up! Back to back! Don't let them isolate you!" "Time to remind him why he fears the ghost," Sarah murmured. She moved to a specific tunnel junction, one she'd prepared for exactly this moment. Above her, Marcus was positioning his men in what appeared to be the town's most defensible position. "Now," she commanded through her signal system. Throughout Silver Creek, her people responded with coordinated precision. The ground beneath Marcus's position suddenly groaned, not enough to collapse, but enough to shake their confidence. Mechanical noises emerged from multiple directions, making it impossible to determine the true threat. And through it all, Sarah's people pressed their advantage. "You've lost your edge, Marcus." Sarah's voice echoed from seemingly everywhere. "Still thinking like a soldier when you should be watching for ghosts." The battle reached its crescendo as dawn approached. Marcus's men, exhausted from a night of psychological warfare and now caught in a physical trap, began surrendering in groups. Those who tried to fight found themselves facing opponents who knew every angle, every shadow, every quirk of terrain in Silver Creek. "Pull back to the saloon," Marcus ordered, trying to maintain control. "Defensive positions." But the saloon had been Sarah's target all along. As his men retreated into the building, they found themselves caught in her most elaborate trap. Every window, every door, every apparent point of cover had been prepared to turn their defensive position into a cage. Through her observation ports, Sarah watched Marcus, realizing too late what she'd done. He wasn't just losing a battle. He was being systematically dismantled by an opponent who'd spent 15 years preparing for exactly this fight. The storm over Silver Creek was reaching its peak, and Marcus was about to learn why some legends only grow stronger with time. Greater than. Marcus Hawkins hadn't survived 20 years of warfare by being predictable. Even as his men retreated into Sarah's trap at the saloon, he was implementing a strategy that proved why he'd been her most dangerous opponent. "Fire the buildings!" His command cut through the chaos. "All of them!" Let's see how well the ghost's tricks work in broad daylight. Sarah watched through her observation ports as Marcus's remaining loyal men produced hidden oil cans and torches. They'd prepared this contingency, knowing they might need to change the battlefield entirely. "He's trying to smoke us out," Tom realized, watching the first flames catch on the livery stable's roof. "No," Sarah corrected grimly. "He's trying to collapse the tunnel network. Fire spreads underground, weakens support structures. He remembers more about the ghost's methods than I gave him credit for." The fire spread with frightening speed, clearly planned in advance. Marcus's men had positioned accelerants at key points, turning Silver Creek's wooden buildings into a potential inferno. "Catherine's team is cut off," John reported through the communication tubes. "Fires blocking their retreat route." Sarah moved quickly to her command table, analyzing the new threat. Marcus had chosen his targets well. The fires threatened not just buildings, but key access points to her tunnel network. More importantly, they threatened to drive her people into the open. "He's not trying to win anymore," she realized. "He's trying to ensure I lose, burn everything rather than admit defeat." Through the listening tubes, Marcus's voice carried his desperate triumph. "Come out, Ghost. Face me in the open, or watch everything you've built burn to ashes." The heat from above began to penetrate the tunnel network. Support beams groaned as fire stressed the carefully engineered structure. Sarah's underground fortress, 15 years in the making, could become a tomb if she didn't act quickly. "Orders?" Quarter's voice crackled through the communication system. "Got a shot at Marcus, but it's risky with all this smoke." Sarah studied her maps, seeing the pattern in Marcus's fire deployment. He'd targeted specific buildings, creating a wall of flame that would force any survivors toward the town square, a killing ground where his remaining men would have clear shots. "He thinks he knows all my tricks," she murmured. Then, louder, "All teams, fall back to position 0. Initiate flood protocol." Tom looked confused. Flood protocol? But the reservoir's been dry for years. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. That's what everyone believes. 15 years of gradually stockpiling water in hidden cisterns, all for this moment. Throughout the tunnel network, her people moved with practiced efficiency. Valves were opened, mechanisms engaged. The sound of rushing water began to fill the underground chambers. "Marcus knows the ghost's old methods," Sarah explained, as they moved to higher ground. "But he's fighting shadows from 20 years ago. He doesn't understand how the legend has evolved." Above ground, Marcus's triumph turned to confusion as water began pouring from seemingly impossible places. Hidden pipes and drainage systems, originally disguised as abandoned mining equipment, now turned Silver Creek streets into carefully directed streams. "What the hell?" one of his men shouted as water began dousing their fires. "Where's it coming from?" The flood wasn't strong enough to wash away buildings, but it was perfectly designed to extinguish fires and turn the packed dirt streets into treacherous mud. Marcus's men found themselves caught between dying fires and an increasingly unstable ground. "Clever," Marcus's voice carried a hint of admiration. "Using my own attack against me. But you're still hiding, Ghost? Still playing your games instead of facing me?" Sarah checked her specialized ammunition one final time. "He's right about one thing. Time to end the games." Through the controlled chaos of steam and mud, Sarah's people began their final repositioning. Marcus had shown his desperation, tried to burn away her advantage. Instead, he'd walked right into her endgame. "All teams ready," Catherine reported. "The stage is set." Sarah nodded grimly. "Then let's show Marcus why some legends adapt instead of fade." Greater than. Steam rose from Silver Creek's muddy streets as the morning sun broke through the chaos. Marcus's fires had been expertly quenched, leaving his men standing in confused clusters, their boots sinking into the carefully engineered mire. The town seemed transformed, no longer a simple settlement, but a battlefield where legend and reality merged. Sarah McCall stepped out of her store's front door, and with that single movement, 15 years of carefully maintained deception fell away. Her widow's stoop vanished, replaced by the straight-backed posture of a warrior. The gray in her hair caught the morning light like steel, and her eyes carried the weight of countless battles. "My God," someone whispered from the gathering crowd of townspeople. "It really is her." Marcus Hawkins stood in the center of the street, his remaining loyal men clustered around him. His face showed the dawning recognition of a truth he'd suspected but hadn't wanted to believe. "The store," he said, understanding finally clicking into place. All these years the ghost wasn't hiding in some secret fortress. She was running the damn general store. "Best place to watch the territory," Sarah replied, her voice carrying the authority that had once made outlaws tremble. "Every traveler stops for supplies. Every conversation carries news, and no one suspects the quiet widow in the corner." The townspeople watched in stunned silence as their friendly shopkeeper transformed before their eyes. Every resident who'd ever bought supplies from her, shared gossip, or sought her motherly advice, now saw the legend hiding beneath the disguise. "Mrs. McCall," Tom Parker stepped forward, no longer just addressing his mentor, but publicly acknowledging the legend. "Or should I say, Marshal?" "Sarah's fine," she smiled, though her eyes never left Marcus. "The badge is retired, even if the duty isn't." One by one, her allies emerged from their positions, Catherine shedding her fine lady's disguise, the Martinez twins appearing like shadows made flesh, Quarter taking up his position on the high ground. Each revelation caused new ripples of amazement through the watching crowd. All this time, Marcus gestured at the town, every building, every street, every friendly neighbor. It was all part of your trap. "Not a trap," Sarah corrected. a home. One I protected by being ready for men like you. The ghost didn't die in that canyon, Marcus. She just found a better way to haunt. The townspeople began to understand what they were witnessing. Every quirk of their town's construction, every odd renovation or repair over the years, had been part of a master plan. Their quiet widow hadn't just been hiding among them. She'd been guarding them. "The stories," old Tucker from the livery spoke up. "All those ghost stories you used to tell in the store, those weren't just tales, were they? They were lessons." "For those who needed to learn them," Sarah nodded. Her hand rested casually near her gun, but everyone could now see the decades of experience in that seemingly relaxed pose. Marcus's face hardened as he realized the full scope of his defeat. He hadn't just failed to take a town, he'd been systematically dismantled by an opponent who had spent 15 years preparing for this moment. "Well then, Ghost," he called out, his voice carrying challenge and desperate pride. "Now that the masks are off, let's finish what we started in that canyon." Sarah's reply carried the weight of legend, but also something more, the authority of a protector who had found something worth defending. "For once, Marcus, you're right. Time to end this story." The morning sun cast long shadows across Silver Creek as its people watched their widow shopkeeper standing against the most dangerous gang in the territory. But now they saw her true nature, not just a legend from the past, but a guardian who had chosen their town as her last battleground. The ghost's final hunt was about to begin. Greater than. Sarah's revelation had changed everything and nothing. The townspeople now saw their widow shopkeeper with new eyes, but the careful preparations she'd made over 15 years remained as solid as ever. As Marcus and his remaining men gathered in the street, those preparations were about to prove their worth. "Last chance, Marcus," Sarah called out, her voice carrying the authority of her true identity. "Surrender now. Face justice properly, or find out why the ghost's legend only grew stronger with time." Marcus's laugh held an edge of desperation. "You've played a fine game, Ghost, but I've still got 30 men to your dozen, and now we know who you are, where you are. No more tricks." Sarah's smile was cold as winter steel. 30 men? Count again. Marcus turned and for the first time noticed what Sarah had orchestrated during the confusion of the fire and flood. His men weren't just wet and muddy, they were scattered, separated into small groups by the carefully channeled water. Each group now stood on what appeared to be solid ground, but was actually one of Sarah's prepared positions. Now! Sarah's command triggered her final trap. Throughout Silver Creek, hidden mechanisms activated. The ground beneath Marcus's separated groups suddenly shifted, not enough to injure, but enough to throw them off balance. At the same time, previously concealed shutters dropped from buildings, panels slid aside, and Sarah's people emerged from positions that had been prepared for exactly this moment. In the space of 3 heartbeats, the tactical situation reversed completely. Instead of 30 men facing a dozen, Marcus's force found themselves split into small groups, each covered by multiple defenders from fortified positions. "Jesus Christ," one of Marcus's lieutenants whispered. "The whole damn town's a trap." "Not the town," Sarah corrected, stepping forward with the fluid grace of a predator. "Just every single inch of ground you're standing on. 15 years of preparation, Marcus. Every building positioned, every sight line calculated, every escape route mapped and countered." Through his growing panic, Marcus finally understood. The store's location, the street layout, even the way the buildings were repaired after storms. "You designed everything for this moment." "Not just for you," Sarah replied. "For any threat that might come to my town. The ghost didn't retire, Marcus. She evolved, found something worth protecting, and spent 15 years making sure she could protect it properly." As if to demonstrate her point, more of her allies emerged from hiding. Not just her old riders, but townspeople too, farmers, shopkeepers, craftsmen, all positioned perfectly and armed with weapons she'd cached years ago. The widow's store hadn't just been her cover, it had been her armory, supplying and training the town's defenders in plain sight. "It's over, Marcus," Catherine called from her position. "Your men are standing in kill boxes. The ground beneath them is rigged to drop at Sarah's signal. Every escape route leads to a prepared ambush." Marcus looked around wildly, seeing his defeat written in every careful detail of the town's construction. The wide street that had seemed perfect for deployment was actually a shooting gallery. The sturdy buildings that looked like defensive positions were death traps waiting to spring. "So this is why they never found the ghost," he said finally, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You didn't just hide. You built yourself a fortress disguised as a town." "No, Marcus," Sarah's voice carried a deeper truth. "I built these people a home and made sure they could defend it. The fortress is just a bonus." With terrible precision, Sarah's final trap began to close. Her people moved with practiced coordination, disarming and securing Marcus's separated groups one by one. Each capture triggered another, a cascade of surrender that had been choreographed years in advance. Marcus watched his force crumbling, understanding at last that he hadn't just lost a battle. He had walked into a legend and found it was more real, more dangerous than even the stories suggested. Greater than. As his men surrendered around him, Marcus Hawkins showed why he'd survived their last encounter. In one fluid motion, he drew and fired, not at Sarah, but at the mechanism controlling one of her trapdoors. The panel sparked and jammed, creating just enough chaos for him to dive through the gap. "Still predictable, ghost," he shouted, rolling into cover behind a water trough. "Always thinking 3 moves ahead, never seeing what's right in front of you." Sarah moved with the same deadly grace that had made her legend, her return fire forcing Marcus to stay down. "That canyon taught you nothing, did it, Marcus? Still thinking you can outfight what you can't outthink." Around them, the final battle for Silver Creek played out with mechanical precision. Sarah's people systematically secured Marcus's surrendering men, each capture following her carefully choreographed plan. But Marcus himself remained the dangerous variable, a cornered predator with nothing left to lose. 15 years, he called out, trying to maneuver for a better position. 15 years planning this elaborate trap. Tell me, Ghost, did you ever consider just shooting me when I first rode into town?" "Considered it," Sarah replied, moving through her pre-planned firing positions. Each step placed her exactly where her years of preparation had determined would give her the best advantage. "But then you'd have died thinking you were clever. This way, you get to understand exactly how completely you've lost." Marcus's response was a burst of gunfire that would have caught any normal opponent. But Sarah had positioned mirrors throughout the street that showed her his reflection, letting her anticipate his move before he made it. Her return shot caught his gun hand, sending his weapon spinning. "The store was brilliant," he admitted, clutching his bleeding hand. "All those times your customers were casing my men's positions, all those deliveries bringing in weapons and supplies. I trained them to watch for military tactics, never thinking to question a simple shopkeeper." Sarah advanced steadily, each step placing her on ground she knew was solid while forcing Marcus onto terrain she'd prepared to be treacherous. "You taught them to look for a ghost, Marcus, never told them that ghosts can live in plain sight." He made one final, desperate move, pulling a hidden derringer. But Sarah had anticipated this too. The ground beneath him shifted slightly, not enough to topple him, but enough to spoil his aim. Her shot caught him clean in the shoulder, the same spot where she'd wounded him 20 years ago. "That's twice I've shot you there," she observed, keeping him covered as Tom moved in to secure him. "Maybe this time you'll learn from it." Marcus looked up at her, finally seeing not just the legend of the ghost, but the deeper truth behind it. The widow act, the store, the whole town. It wasn't just a cover, was it? You actually built yourself a home here, found something worth protecting, and spent 15 years making sure I could protect it properly," Sarah confirmed. She nodded to Catherine, who began coordinating the final roundup of Marcus's men. "The ghost didn't fade away, Marcus. She just found a better way to haunt." As the morning sun climbed higher, Silver Creek's people emerged fully from hiding, seeing their town with new eyes. Every building, every street, every seemingly ordinary feature that had been part of Sarah's master plan now stood revealed as components of the most elaborate trap ever constructed. "You know what your real mistake was?" Sarah asked Marcus as Tom led him away. "You came looking for the ghost of legend. Never considered that legends don't survive by staying the same. They evolve, adapt, become something new." The town gathered around her, no longer seeing the quiet widow who kept their general store, but understanding at last that she had been so much more, a guardian who had turned their entire town into a weapon to protect them. "The ghost isn't just a person, Marcus," she called after him. "It's a promise, and I always keep my promises." Greater than. The afternoon sun found Silver Creek transformed not just physically, but fundamentally. Sarah stood in her store, no longer a simple shop, but revealed as the command center it had always been, watching as law enforcement arrived from 3 counties to handle her prisoners. "Quite a haul," Sheriff Bennett remarked, having ridden hard from Carson City at Tom's summons. 43 members of the Hawkins Gang, including Marcus himself, been trying to catch him for 15 years. "Technically," Sarah replied, her voice carrying its natural authority now that the pretense was gone. "I caught him 20 years ago. He just took a while to stay caught." The jail couldn't hold all the prisoners, so Sarah had them secured in her tunnel network. The same hidden chambers that had helped her capture them now served as excellent holding cells. Each man was properly documented, their crimes carefully matched to outstanding warrants. "Found these in Marcus's saddlebags," Catherine reported, bringing in a stack of papers. "Records of every operation, every crime, every corrupt official on their payroll. He was as methodical as you remembered." Sarah nodded, appreciating the irony. "His attention to detail was always his strength. Now it's evidence that will dismantle what's left of his organization." Tom Parker moved through the proceedings with new confidence, helping process prisoners while coordinating with other jurisdictions. He'd grown into his badge over the past few days, earning the respect of veteran lawmen with his handling of the crisis. "U.S. Marshal's office is sending representatives," he informed Sarah. "Word of the ghost's return is causing quite a stir in official circles." "Let them stir," Sarah replied, sorting through Marcus's documents. "Our job is making sure justice is served properly. Everything by the book, every charge documented, every prisoner treated fairly." She'd been explicit about this. No rough justice, no frontier law. Every member of the Hawkins Gang would face proper trial with proper evidence. The ghost's legend had grown through precision, not brutality, and she intended to maintain that standard. Marcus himself sat in her store's back room, under heavy guard, while a doctor tended his wounds. His expression showed a man still processing how completely he'd been outmaneuvered. "You could have killed us all," he observed, as Sarah checked on him. "Had the positions, had the advantage? Why take prisoners?" "Because that's the difference between justice and vengeance," Sarah replied. "The ghost wasn't just a hunter, Marcus. She was a lawwoman. Some things don't change, even when the badge comes off." Throughout the afternoon, more law enforcement arrived, drawn by the magnitude of the capture. Each found themselves dealing with Sarah's methodical organization, prisoners categorized by crimes, evidence carefully preserved, witnesses prepared to testify. "This isn't just an arrest," she explained to Tom as they worked. "It's a lesson in how justice should work. Remember that when you're wearing that badge after I go back to being just the shopkeeper." But they both knew that wasn't entirely true. Sarah's role in Silver Creek had changed permanently. The widow's facade had served its purpose, allowing her to build something more important than a legend, a community that could protect itself. "What happens now?" Tucker asked, representing the townspeople who were still adjusting to their shopkeeper's true identity. "Will you leave, now that everyone knows?" Sarah's response carried the weight of both her identities, the ghost's authority and the shopkeeper's commitment. "This is my home, Mr. Tucker. I didn't spend 15 years preparing to defend it, just to leave once the job was done." As evening approached, the prisoners were transferred to heavily guarded wagons for transport to the territorial prison. Sarah watched them go, standing openly in her doorway rather than hidden behind her widow's disguise. "The ghost's last hunt," Marcus called out as he was led past. "Quite a story they'll tell about this one." "No, Marcus," Sarah corrected him. "Just the ghost's best trick, turning a legend into something better, a home worth protecting and people worth protecting it for." Greater than. The day after Marcus's capture, Sarah began the delicate process of transforming Silver Creek back into a normal town, or at least as normal as it could be now that its secrets were exposed. Her store remained closed, its shelves still moved aside to reveal the command center hidden behind them. "We've recovered most of the weapons," Quarter reported, helping restore order to the chaos. "But the tunnel network's been compromised. Every lawman who came through here yesterday knows about it now." "Let them know," Sarah replied, sorting through years of accumulated intelligence. "The tunnels serve their purpose. Now they can serve a new one. Reminder that this town isn't as defenseless as it looks." Throughout Silver Creek, evidence of the battle was being cleared away. The Martinez twins supervised repairs to buildings damaged in the fighting, while Catherine coordinated with insurance companies to ensure residents would be compensated for their losses. Even in the aftermath, Sarah's organization showed its thoroughness. 3 more marshals arrived this morning," Tom reported, looking more comfortable in his deputy's badge with each passing hour. "They're asking about jurisdiction, about your status as a former marshal, about everything." Sarah smiled, remembering similar bureaucratic tangles from her official days. "Give them full cooperation. Let them see exactly how we handled everything. Professional law enforcement doesn't fear oversight. It welcomes it." The town itself was changing, adjusting to its new reality. Residents who had known Sarah only as the quiet widow now saw her true nature in every detail of their town's construction. The way buildings had been positioned for clear lines of fire, the carefully maintained escape routes, the hidden caches of emergency supplies, all revealed a level of protection they'd never fully appreciated. "It's like living in a fortress," Tucker remarked, helping clear debris from the street. "But we never knew it until we needed it." That was the point, Sarah explained, no longer hiding her tactical knowledge. "Best defense is one your enemies don't recognize until it's too late." The town needed to look and feel normal, even while being prepared for anything. Her old companions began departing one by one, returning to their own carefully maintained covers across the territory, each left with new assignments, new intelligence to process, new threats to watch for. The Ghost's network hadn't ended with Marcus's capture. If anything, it had proven its worth more than ever. "You've built something unique here," Catherine observed before leaving. "Not just a defensive position, but a whole community trained to protect itself without losing its soul." Sarah watched her people, and they were her people now, more than ever, going about their business. Shopkeepers reopened their stores, farmers returned to their fields, life began resuming its normal rhythms. But there was a new confidence in their movements, a deeper understanding of their town's strength. "Marshal Cooper would be proud," John said quietly, preparing for his own departure. "You didn't just hide among them, you made them stronger." The town council met that evening in Sarah's store, no longer pretending it was anything but the command center it had always been. They discussed practical matters, repairs needed, security adjustments required now that their secrets were known, plans for the future. The ghost's legend will bring attention, Sarah warned them. Some good, some bad. We need to be ready for both. But looking at their faces, she saw not fear, but determination. These weren't just townspeople anymore. They were defenders who had proven their worth against one of the territory's most dangerous threats. Let them come, Tucker spoke for all of them. We're not just a widow's store and some scattered buildings anymore. We're Silver Creek, the town that caught Marcus Hawkins, the town the ghost chose to protect. Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of both her identities, the legend she'd been and the protector she'd become. The widow's facade had served its purpose, but perhaps what replaced it would be even more valuable, a community that understood its own strength. The ghost's legend had evolved once more, becoming something not just one person could embody, but an entire town could live up to. Greater than. Deputy Tom Parker stood in Sarah's store, watching her reorganize her shelves. The morning light caught the silver of her badge, not her old Marshal star, but a new one. The territorial governor had appointed her special investigator, officially recognizing what she'd been doing unofficially for 15 years. They offered me a marshal's position, Tom said quietly, fingering his deputy's badge. Full commission, based in Carson City, said after what happened here, they could use someone trained by the ghost. Sarah continued her work, but he caught her slight smile. Carson City's a big step up from Silver Creek. Good opportunity for a young lawman. That's just it. Tom moved closer, choosing his words carefully. I've been thinking about everything you taught me, not just the tactics and shooting, but the deeper lessons, about how real justice works. Now Sarah turned to face him fully, seeing not the green deputy who'd first sought her stories, but a man who'd grown into his badge. And what did you learn about real justice, Deputy Parker? That it's not just about catching bad men, he replied, conviction growing in his voice. It's about protecting good people, building something worth defending. That's what you did here, isn't it? You didn't just hide in Silver Creek, you made it stronger. Through the window, they watched the town going about its business. But there was a new awareness in how people moved, a deeper understanding of their community's strength. Every person who'd stood with them against Marcus's gang now carried themselves differently. I turned down Carson City, Tom announced. Told them I had unfinished business here, if you'll have me, that is. Sarah studied him carefully. Silver Creek's not going to be the same quiet post it was. Word's out about what happened here. Other troublemakers might come, thinking to make their reputation. Good. Tom's hand rested naturally near his gun, a gesture he'd learned from her. Let them come. They'll find more than just the ghost waiting for them. They'll find a whole town ready to stand together. You understand what you're choosing? Sarah moved to her hidden map table, now openly displayed in the store. This isn't just law enforcement anymore. It's something new, a community that protects itself, that stands for something bigger. Tom nodded, seeing the deeper pattern in everything she'd built. That's why I want to stay. Carson City has enough badges. Silver Creek has something better. It has purpose, and if you're willing to keep teaching me, I want to learn how to serve that purpose. Sarah's smile carried approval, but also challenge. Teaching doesn't stop just because the secret's out. If anything, there's more to learn now. We'll need new methods, new approaches. The ghost's old tricks won't work the same way anymore. So we'll make new ones, Tom replied with quiet confidence. You didn't just teach me to shoot straight or read signs. You taught me to think differently about what justice means, about what's worth protecting and how to protect it. Sarah reached into her desk, pulling out a small wooden box. Inside lay a badge, not a deputy's star, but something new. The territorial governor had authorized Silver Creek to form its own special law enforcement unit, acknowledging the unique role the town had taken on. New badge for a new kind of lawman, she said, holding it out, if you're sure this is what you want. Tom took the badge, feeling its weight, not just the metal, but the responsibility it represented. I'm sure. The ghost might have started this, but Silver Creek's story isn't over. It's just beginning. Sarah nodded, seeing in him the same commitment that had led her to choose this town 15 years ago. Then let's get to work, Deputy. We've got a lot to do, and justice doesn't serve itself. Together, they stepped out into the morning light, mentor and student, ready to write the next chapter in Silver Creek's legend. Greater than. A week after Marcus's capture, Silver Creek began finding its new rhythm. Sarah's store reopened, but with significant changes. The hidden armory remained, now supplemented by an official weapons locker. The command center became a legitimate law enforcement office, though its more subtle features stayed carefully concealed. "It's strange," Mrs. Henderson remarked while buying supplies. "The store feels different now, knowing what it really is, but also the same, like it was always both things at once." "Because it was," Sarah replied, measuring coffee beans with the same precision she'd once used to plan operations. "Everything in Silver Creek has always been exactly what it appeared to be, and something more." The town's reconstruction efforts revealed this dual nature. As buildings damaged in the fighting were repaired, Sarah supervised the work, ensuring that defensive features were maintained while remaining discreet. The townspeople now participated knowingly in maintaining their community's security. "Smithy's Forge is up and running again," Tom reported during their morning meeting. "Tucker suggested we add some of those hidden caches to his new barn, too. Seems everyone wants to contribute now." Sarah nodded approvingly. They've learned that security isn't just about guns and badges. It's about community, about everyone playing their part. The tunnel network, its existence now known, was being officially mapped and documented. But Sarah made sure certain passages remained secret, known only to those who needed to know. Some advantages were worth preserving, even in this new era of openness. 3 more towns have sent representatives, Tom continued. They want to know how we organized our defense, how we turned ordinary citizens into an effective security force without losing our way of life. "Show them the basics," Sarah instructed. "The communication networks, the community watch systems, the emergency response plans. But remember, our greatest strength isn't in the tactics. It's in the trust we've built." That trust was evident in how the town handled the attention its victory had brought. Reporters seeking stories about the ghost found themselves talking instead to shopkeepers, farmers, and craftsmen who spoke proudly of their community's unity. The legend became something larger than just one person. "We're getting requests for training," Tom added. "Other law enforcement agencies want to learn our methods." Sarah considered this while organizing her shelves, still as store's shelves, but now also openly serving as a visual communication system for the town's defenders. "We'll help where we can, but Silver Creek needs to come first. We're not just a training ground, we're a working model of how justice and community can support each other." The town council, meeting in what was now officially called the Command Store, discussed plans for the future. Every member understood their dual role, maintaining normal life while being ready to defend it. "The ghost taught us more than just defense," Tucker observed during one session. "She taught us that strength doesn't have to change who you are. It just helps you be more of what you already were." Sarah watched her town healing, growing stronger through its scars. The physical damage was being repaired, but more importantly, the community was forging a new identity. They weren't just the town that had captured Marcus Hawkins. They were the town that had chosen to stand together. "Got word from Catherine," Tom reported late one evening. 2 other gangs that were considering moving into the territory have suddenly changed their minds. Seems our reputation is spreading." "Good," Sarah replied, checking the store's new security systems, a blend of her old preparations and modern improvements. "But remember, reputation is like any other weapon. It's not about having it, it's about how you use it." As night fell over Silver Creek, lights appeared in windows that were now both home and watchtower. Patrols moved through streets that were both thoroughfare and defensive position. And in her store, Sarah continued her work, no longer hiding her true nature, but finding a way to be both legend and shopkeeper, protector, and community member. The town was healing, but it was healing into something stronger than it had been before, a community that understood its own power and was ready to use it wisely. Greater than. Word of Silver Creek's transformation spread through the territory like wildfire, but not in the way most expected. Instead of tales about the ghost return, people spoke of something more remarkable, a town that had turned itself into a symbol of justice without losing its soul. "Another letter from Cedar Ridge," Tom announced, bringing the morning mail to Sarah's store. "Their town council wants to know how we balance law enforcement with normal life. That's the 5th such request this week." Sarah sorted through the correspondence while serving regular customers, her dual role now openly acknowledged. "Send them our basic guidelines. Remember, it's not about copying our methods exactly. It's about finding their own way to stand together." The impact of Silver Creek's victory rippled outward in unexpected ways. Criminal organizations that had considered expanding into the territory suddenly found themselves facing not just law enforcement, but united communities that watched their borders and protected their own. "Interesting reports coming in," Catherine wrote in her latest intelligence dispatch. 3 towns have already started organizing along our lines. Not just law enforcement, whole communities working together. They're calling it the Silver Creek model. Sarah discussed this development with her town council, now expanded to include both civic leaders and security coordinators. "We need to be careful," she warned. "What works here won't work everywhere. Each community needs to find its own strength." "But we can show them how," Tucker argued. "Not just the tactics and preparations, but the principles. How to stay true to themselves while becoming stronger." The territorial governor, recognizing the significance of what was happening, officially designated Silver Creek as a training center for community-based law enforcement, but Sarah insisted on maintaining the town's essential character. "We're not turning into a fortress or a military camp," she explained to visiting officials. "We're showing how ordinary people can protect themselves while staying ordinary people. That's the real lesson here." Through it all, Sarah's store remained the heart of both town and legend. Customers still came for supplies, but now they also came for guidance. She helped them understand that security wasn't about changing who you were, it was about being strong enough to stay true to yourself. "Got an interesting pattern developing," Tom reported during their evening briefing. "Criminal activity is dropping across the region, not because of increased arrests, but because communities are becoming harder targets. They're working together, watching out for each other." "Just like we do here," Sarah nodded, pleased. The Ghost's old method of hunting down threats was being replaced by something more sustainable, communities that could protect themselves. Visitors to Silver Creek often expressed surprise at what they found. Instead of an armed camp, they discovered a thriving town where shopkeepers, farmers, and craftsmen went about their business while maintaining constant, subtle vigilance. "The Ghost's greatest legacy," Sarah explained to one official, "isn't in teaching people to fight. It's in teaching them they don't have to change who they are to be strong." The territorial marshals, adapting to this new reality, began coordinating with community-based security networks. Sarah's model of combining professional law enforcement with local involvement proved more effective than traditional methods. "You've started something bigger than just catching Marcus," Catherine observed during a visit. "You've shown people there's a middle ground between helplessness and militarization, a way to be both peaceful and strong." Sarah watched from her store as Silver Creek continued its daily life, each ordinary activity now layered with deeper purpose. The ghost's legend had evolved into something more powerful than one person's story. It had become a template for communities finding their own strength. "The territory's changing," Tom remarked, watching children play safely in streets that were both thoroughfare and defensive position, not through force or fear, but through people standing together. "That's the real victory," Sarah replied, seeing her life's work bearing fruit in ways she'd never imagined. Not just protecting people, but teaching them to protect themselves without losing who they are. Greater than. A month after Marcus's capture, Silver Creek found its new rhythm. Sarah's store operated openly as both community hub and command center, its dual nature no longer a secret, but a source of pride. The morning found her training new deputies while simultaneously helping customers select dry goods. "Mind the coffee beans, Tom," she called out, correcting a trainee's shooting stance. "Mrs. Peterson likes them fresh ground, and watch your left elbow when you draw." The town had adapted to its unique status with remarkable grace. Farmers carried on with their work while maintaining subtle surveillance of the surrounding countryside. The smithy forged both horseshoes and security equipment. Every business served double duty, just as Sarah's store had always done. "Got the new security rotation sorted," Tom reported, helping stock shelves between law enforcement duties. "Tucker's boys take the north watch. Miller's family covers the south approach. Everyone's fitting it into their regular work?" Sarah nodded approvingly. "That's the key, making security part of daily life, not something separate from it. Just like this store has always been more than just a store." The tunnel network, now officially recognized, served as both emergency system and community resource. Regular folks used certain sections for storage or shelter from storms, while the more sensitive areas remained restricted to Sarah's trained personnel. "Starting to understand why you chose a store," Tom mused during a quiet moment. "Best way to protect people is to be part of their everyday lives. Can't guard something properly if you're separate from it." "Exactly," Sarah agreed, checking the hidden mechanisms that were now complemented by official security systems. The ghost worked alone, but a community works together, each person doing their part while living their life. New residents arrived, drawn by Silver Creek's reputation, but Sarah and the town council carefully screened each arrival. They weren't looking for gunfighters or adventurers, but for people who understood the balance between normal life and constant readiness. "Had another family apply to settle here," Tom reported. "Farmers from up north. Good people, from what I can tell. They say they want a community that can protect itself without turning into an armed camp." "That's exactly what we're building," Sarah replied. "Not a fortress, but a home worth protecting, and people worth protecting it with." The store's back room, once her secret command center, now served as both official office and training area. Maps still covered the walls, but now they showed patrol routes alongside trade routes, defense positions alongside grazing lands. "It's interesting," Tucker observed during a council meeting. "We're doing almost exactly what we did before, just openly now. Still farming, still trading, still watching out for each other, just not hiding it anymore." Sarah's role had evolved too. No longer playing the widow, she still maintained her shopkeeper's duties while openly serving as the town's chief of security. Her customer conversations now included both advice about preserved goods and subtle lessons in community defense. "The ghost had to hide to do her work," she explained to a group of visiting officials. "But a community grows stronger by standing openly together, each person knowing their role, everyone supporting each other." As evening approached, Sarah watched her town from the store's doorway. Families went about their business, children played in the streets, and beneath it all ran a current of quiet readiness. Not tension, but awareness, the knowledge that every ordinary activity contributed to the town's security. "Got word from Catherine," Tom said, joining her. "2 more gangs turned away from the territory without firing a shot. said it wasn't worth facing organized communities that know how to defend themselves. Sarah smiled, seeing her life's work bearing fruit. The ghost's solitary mission had grown into something far more powerful, a community that could protect itself while remaining true to its values. "That's the real victory," she said quietly. "Not just making the territory safer, but showing people they can be both peaceful and strong. That ordinary life and extraordinary readiness can exist together." Greater than. Stories about the ghost changed in the months following Marcus's capture. Where once they spoke of a solitary figure hunting evil-doers through the night, now they told of something more profound, a legend that had found a way to live in daylight. "Heard a new version in Carson City," Catherine reported during one of her visits to the store. "They're saying the ghost didn't just protect people, she taught them to protect themselves. That's becoming the heart of the legend now." Sarah continued arranging her merchandise, each item placed to allow quick access to the weapons still hidden beneath the counter. Legends change because people need different things from them. The territory doesn't need a lone avenger anymore, it needs an example. The story of Silver Creek spread far beyond its capture of Marcus Hawkins. Travelers carried tales of a town where ordinary people had found extraordinary strength without losing their humanity. Each telling added new layers to the ghost's legend. "Had some interesting visitors today," Tom reported during their evening briefing. "Family passing through said they detoured 50 miles just to see the town where the ghost became more than just a ghost. Their children were disappointed we weren't all wearing guns and badges." "Let them be disappointed," Sarah replied. "The real story is in what they don't see. Farmers who can spot trouble 3 miles out, shopkeepers who know every stranger's business, children who play freely because an entire community watches over them." The old stories didn't die. They evolved. Round campfires and in saloons, people still spoke of the ghost's famous hunts and captures. But now they added new chapters, how the legend had put down roots, how it had grown into something larger than one person. "You've changed how people think about justice," Tucker observed during a town council meeting. "It's not just about catching bad men anymore. It's about building something good and knowing how to keep it that way." Sarah's store became part of the legend, too. Visitors often came expecting to find an arsenal disguised as a shop. Instead, they discovered something more remarkable, a place that was exactly what it appeared to be, yet also something more. "Got a letter from the territorial governor," Tom announced one morning. "Says 3 more towns have adopted our methods. Not just the security measures, but the whole approach, building community strength through everyday life." "That's the real legacy," Sarah noted, watching her town go about its business. "Not teaching people to fight, but teaching them they're stronger together than alone." The ghost's reputation still deterred trouble. Outlaws avoided the territory, not because they feared one legendary hunter, but because they understood the futility of targeting communities that could defend themselves. "Interesting thing," Catherine mused during another visit. "Used to be trouble came looking for the ghost. Now it avoids anywhere that looks like it might have learned from her. The legends become preventive rather than reactive." Through it all, Sarah maintained her dual role, shopkeeper and protector, legend and community member. Her store continued serving as both business and symbol, showing how ordinary places could carry extraordinary meaning. "You know what's really changed?" Tom asked one evening as they watched the sunset from the store's porch. "The ghost used to be a story about what one person could do. Now it's a story about what any community can do if they stand together." Sarah nodded, seeing her life's work transformed into something far more lasting than her original mission. The ghost's legend had become a template for hope, not through mysterious powers or spectacular deeds, but through the simple strength of people protecting their own. "Best kind of legend," she replied, watching families head home in the fading light, secure in their community's strength. Not one that makes people look for a hero to save them, but one that shows them how to save themselves. The sun set on Silver Creek, but unlike in the old stories, darkness brought no fear. The ghost's legend had evolved from a shadow that hunted evil to a light that showed people their own strength. Greater than, the seasons turned and Silver Creek flourished in its new identity. 1 year after Marcus's capture, Sarah stood in her store's doorway just as she had that first morning when his scouts had arrived. But now she stood straight and proud, no longer hiding behind a widow's stoop. "Quiet morning," Tom observed, bringing the daily reports. He'd grown into his role, carrying his badge with the quiet confidence of someone who understood that true strength came from serving a community, not just wearing authority. "Best kind of morning," Sarah replied, watching her town wake up. Farmers headed to their fields, each one carrying the awareness she'd taught them. Shopkeepers opened their stores, their ordinary business layered with the vigilance that had become second nature. The store had changed too, yet remained fundamentally the same. Supplies still lined the shelves, but now everyone understood that each item's placement had meaning. Each display served multiple purposes. The command center in the back room operated openly, blending law enforcement with community life. "Got word from Marcus," Tom mentioned, sorting through the mail. "He's still in territorial prison, but he's been writing about Silver Creek. Says understanding how we work has taught him more about justice than all his years of breaking the law." Sarah nodded, remembering their final conversation. Sometimes the best way to defeat an enemy is to show them a better way to live. The morning brought its usual mix of customers, townsfolk buying supplies, travelers passing through, official visitors studying the Silver Creek model. Each found exactly what they were looking for, whether it was coffee beans or lessons in community defense. "Young Deputy Williams is here from Cedar Ridge," Tom reported. "Says their town council has finally agreed to try our methods. They want to know where to start." "Start with the simple things," Sarah advised, measuring coffee beans with practiced precision. "Teaching people to watch out for each other, to make protection part of daily life, the rest follows naturally." Through her window, she watched children playing in the street, their games incorporating the awareness she'd helped instill in the community. They grew up understanding that security didn't mean living in fear, it meant being prepared while embracing life fully. "You know what I realized?" Tom said, helping a customer while simultaneously checking the street. "A year ago we were doing all these same things just secretly. Now we're doing them openly, and somehow that's made them more effective." "Because now everyone understands their part," Sarah explained. "The ghost had to work alone, in shadows. But a community works best in daylight, with everyone knowing their role and supporting each other." The tunnel network, partially sealed but maintained for emergencies, served as a reminder of how far they'd come. What had once been a secret system of escape routes now symbolized their community's readiness, hidden strength supporting ordinary life. "Got another letter from the governor," Tom mentioned. "Wants to know if you'll consider teaching at the Territorial Law Enforcement Academy. Just part-time, of course. Stores still got to run." Sarah smiled, appreciating how her two roles had finally merged into one. "Might be worth considering. New generation of lawmen could benefit from understanding that justice isn't just about hunting down trouble. It's about building something worth protecting." As evening approached, Sarah completed her daily routine, checking inventory, updating records, maintaining the security systems that were now an acknowledged part of the store's operation. Each task served multiple purposes, just as she'd always intended. "Full circle," she mused, watching the sunset paint Silver Creek in familiar colors, from a ghost hunting in darkness to a community standing in light. Tom nodded, understanding. "The best kind of ending, one that's really a new beginning." "Not an ending at all," Sarah corrected, seeing her life's work fulfilled in ways she'd never imagined. The ghost story was about hunting down evil, but Silver Creek's story, that's about building something good and knowing how to keep it safe. That story never ends. It just grows stronger with each passing day. The sun set on Silver Creek, but unlike in the old tales, darkness brought no fear. The ghost's legend had evolved into something far more powerful, a community that had learned to be its own light in the darkness.